Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy. This is the Reate Horizon C. Pocket knife by Reate Knives. Reate Knives is a Chinese brand made and founded in China, which is really trying to push the envelope of the high end coming out of Chinese knives, and that's pretty excellent. I want to thank my buddies Frankie and Bud for sending this little guy along. Well, nothing little about it particularly, but it's an interesting knife, and I wouldn't have gotten to handle one otherwise, so that's great. Size comparison-wise, this is your Ontario Rat number 1 in D2 steel, and so you can see this guy is actually a fair bit larger than the Ontario Rat number 1. Here's the Rat number 2, way, way bigger than the Rat 2. Here is your Spyderco Delica, by tradition's sake. Here is your Spyderco PM2. So bigger than your PM2 even, both in the handle and otherwise, although handles are actually fairly comparable. And here is your Chris Reeve Knives Large Shabazz, which is another of those larger sorts of beefy knives. And then finally, my token huge knife is the ZTO 452CF, which is another large knife, which is actually slightly larger than the Horizon here. So there you go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Reate Horizon. First off, it's worth noting there are a variety of different Reate Horizons that have been released. There's some with carbon fiber scales. This is the Horizon C with the blackwash titanium. But, you know, they've all got very similar blade shapes, things like that. So keep that in mind. On the good side, though, first off, the ergonomics actually are quite nice. This feels great in my hand in a lot of ways. The clip is maybe a little hot spotty in places, but the whole thing is very, very compelling in the hand. It's got these nice little carve-outs right here for your index finger, which helps to keep this guy in hand, nonetheless. And it's nicely done. It fits great in my hand, and even I've got a fairly small hand, so big knives tend to be a little awkward for me, but this works great, and it locks into the hand in a very real way with some of these carvings and with some of the sculpting here. So the ergos on this are absolutely good. Another thing that I love about this knife is the blade shape. You've got a nice flat portion followed by a little bit of belly. In my experience, that's a great kind of mechanism for getting good EDC performance. And you've also got this nice drop point to it. I mean, the blade looks great and also functions great, so I like it very much. The blade steel is also great. It's S35VN, which is a very, very solid steel, one of my favorites. Speaking of solid, this knife is just rock solid. Absolutely freaking solid. You can see it's got a lockup about 50% here. It's pretty great. It's even got an over travel stop. I mean, this is a beefy knife, but it's well built, and that's nice. And speaking of which, the construction on the whole here is very, very nice. It's got relatively big screws. You're looking at T10s, T8s, rather than T6s, the normal sort of smaller screws that everybody goes. The stonewash on the blade is very nice. It's a stonewash, but it's even got a little bit of hint of reflectivity, of mirroring to it, and it lends it a very nice sort of clean effect. And I don't even mind the titanium finish on the scales here. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of acid stone washes, a blackened blackwash, whatever, but I think this looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit on the fragile side, showing marks and whatnot, but it's a very, very nice little finish here. And, you know, I love, love, love the shaping of the lock bar here. This little bit of scallop on the lock bar, they didn't need to do it, but it looks very nice. It adds a little bit of flair to it. And speaking of a little bit of flair, the blade engraving here is actually excellent. I don't know how they're doing that engraving, but it feels like it's got almost some depth to it. Not much, but it feels great. It's some sort of an acid engrave, but it looks great. It's very crisp. It's very clean. It's absolutely great, and so that's a nice little construction detail that shows that they gave a damn as they were building this knife. This knife on the whole actually just strikes me as one of my very favorite things, which is a relatively simple thing done well. It's 2 chunks of titanium, it's a blade, it's some bearings, and it's a lock bar. That's really it, and they've done it, they've executed it just brilliantly. And then finally, on the good side, the price on this is very, very nice. It's $250 for a well-made titanium S35VN knife with a very, very good action. We'll talk about that in a moment, but the price seems absolutely okay here. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but you're getting a lot of knife for it, so no complaints there. So that's your good. Good price. It's a simple thing that's done well. The construction on it is great with some nice details built into it. It's absolutely solid. It's got a great blade shape. It's got good ergonomics. I mean, just overall, there's a lot of good here. Let's talk about what's great, though. So on the great side here, 100% the action on this knife is great. It's a great flipper. It's a nice light switchy sort of thing. It's got a stellar detent on there, and it's very, very smooth. The knife has actually a multi-row bearing system, MRBS. If you watch this assembly, you'll see what I'm talking about here. But rather than just one row of bearings, they have 2 rows of bearings, which provide a little bit more lateral support for the blade. And the whole thing is just very, very, very smooth. It's not, fully on drop shotty in the same sense that some other knives are, but it's got a very respectable action. And considering the rest of the knife is done well, that's really icing on the cake. So the action on this guy is... I just cannot complain about this action. It's a great action, and Reate is really, really good at making great detents and great actions on knives. So, no big shock there. Let's talk about what's bad. So on the bad side, the blade is a little bit on the overly thick side. It's not too terribly thick behind the edge, and it is a fairly tall blade, so it's okay. It's still going to work fine as a slicer. I got no real huge objection to it, but I would still like to see blades get a little bit thinner one of these days. Not everybody's hard using, people. Moving along. The flipper tab on this guy is unfortunately quite the pocket pecker. It's a very prominent flipper tab, and so it's going to be pecking on whatever's in your pocket all day long. That's not stellar. It's a little bit annoying, especially relative to some of your less prominent flipper tabs out there in the world. There's a lot of flipper tab there. Not a big deal, but bugs me a little bit. The lanyard hole on this guy, moving along, unfortunately feels kind of tacked on, feels kind of lazy. They just drilled a hole in the bottom of it. I would have preferred some kind of an internal lanyard hole, because I feel like it breaks up this very nice, very clean design by just, we put a hole in it. And I'm not a lanyard guy, so I don't have a strong opinion there. I generally prefer knives without lanyard holes or with hidden lanyard holes, but this just doesn't do it for me. It feels a little bit ugly, a little lazy. But that's personal, of course. The finish on this guy is slightly fragile. You can see here that there are a fair amount of snail trails, and it's very easy for something that, rubs up against this guy to leave little marks here and there. Not the end of the world, but it is something you got to keep in mind. This is not going to be as resilient as some of your other titanium finishes, although the marks will kind of look like the rest of the stonewash. Not the end of the world. The clip, on the other hand, is getting to be a much less beautiful thing. The clip is very stiff. It's a milled sort of clip. It's got a very, very little ramp on this guy, meaning it's very hard to get into thicker pockets, absolutely. And so I'm left with the impression that the clip on this guy is very pretty, but it's just not a very good clip, particularly. This is kind of an example of a time when I would have preferred just a straightforward spring clip sort of affair, rather than this sculpted milled clip, which just unfortunately misses the mark. So that's not great, particularly. And then finally, this guy is a very big knife, and it's also a relatively heavy knife. There's not any internal milling to reduce the weight. It's got a big, thick chunk of blade on it, and as a result, this is a heavy knife. You're looking at 6.65 ounces. That's some weight in your pocket, and given you're getting a big knife out of the deal, but still, this is not something you just throw in your pocket and forget about all day. This is a biggish knife, and it's a heavyish knife. I mean, in the pocket, it's bigger. It's differently big than the PM2. But it's thick. It's beefy. So if you're looking for something compact, this is absolutely not going to be your choice. So that's what's bad about this guy. It's big, it's heavy, it's beefy. The clip on it isn't stellar. The finish is a little bit on the fragile side. The lanyard hole feels a little tacked on. It's got quite the pocket pecker going on here with the flipper tab. The blade is a little bit overly thick. And, so there you go. Let's talk about the ugly here. The ugly about this knife is this fuller here, also known as a crud groove. Basically, this is a little area here that is designed to catch whatever you've been cutting today and mix it with whatever you're going to be cutting into tomorrow. So if you cut open a bottle of motor oil, you have motor oil in your fuller. You can try and wipe it off, but there's still going to be some of that. So tomorrow, if you cut open some cheese, you're going to have motor oil in your cheese. Then the next day, when you're breaking down cardboard, you're going to end up with cardboard that's coated in motor oil and cheese, and so forth and so on. And especially given that the fuller actually goes all the way into the uncleanable interior portions of the knife, You can kind of get to it if you do one of these things. It's just not going to be straightforward. It's also a little bit deep relative to a lot of fillers, and it's very long. This filler is just ugly. I don't tend to like fillers, but this one particularly. And especially given that the full flat grind stops with it, the top of the filler actually provides a little bit of resistance to whatever you're cutting into. I really would like this knife a lot better with a different sort of accent than the fuller they put on it. So to me, that's absolutely ugly. This crud groove is just no good. So there you go. Let's talk final conclusion, though. So, I mean, this is a great knife in a lot of ways. It's got a great action, the construction's great, the materials are great, and it comes in at a pretty decent price. It's bordering on being a pretty decent value, actually. But for me personally, this fuller is just brutally ugly. I hate that deeply, and so it absolutely puts it out of gem territory for me. But if you're okay with the filler, and you're okay with this being a really big, really beefy, and very thick knife, and you like the look of it, I think you're going to like it. There's a lot of good here, and the good far outweighs the bad. So, for me, not quite hitting gem. They need to fix some things, but it is still a damn good knife. And if you like it, go for it. You'll probably be happy. So there you go. That's the recommendation. Let me know in the comments if there's one of these on your horizon. Sorry, that was bad. And have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.